My son has expressed a desire for his stepdad to be his only real father and is asking me to relinquish my parental rights. Hello, everyone. Before diving into the events that unfolded, I want to mention something first. I'm currently facing a challenging situation with my son, and I would greatly appreciate it if everyone could be considerate and thoughtful in their responses to this post. My son just turned 17 a week ago, and we celebrated his birthday recently. He's set to begin college this fall, too. Our relationship has been strained ever since I made the decision to divorce his mother 2 years ago, and despite my efforts, I haven't been able to mend things with him. He continually distances himself, and while it pains me, I did everything I could to hold on until I reached my limit. He ignores my texts and calls, and even when he comes over, he just stays locked in his room the whole time, refusing to engage with me. We communicate only during lunch or dinner when he's around, and even then, he makes an effort to limit the conversation. Frustration took over, and I began to pull away. I stopped investing my heart and soul into mending our relationship because it was evident that it wasn't what he desired. Perhaps that was my initial error. My relationship with my ex-wife is pretty strained, and I believe that's a significant reason why my son has such strong feelings of resentment towards me now. I'm 44 and my wife is 42. We had been married for nearly 2 decades, but things took a turn for the worse when I lost my job a few years back. The sudden layoff hit our family like a ton of bricks, leaving us all in disbelief. My wife is a teacher, and while her salary isn't high, she manages to make it work, which I truly admire. However, despite my efforts to secure another job quickly, she started to resent me. I believe I was unemployed for about 2 months, but I wasn't just lounging around at home. I was actively searching for a job that offered a decent salary. My wife handled all the expenses while we struggled to save anything. The tension escalated, leading to daily arguments until we reached a point where we only communicated when it was essential. The anger and frustration continued to accumulate, leading her to file for divorce, and I chose not to contest it. I believe we were both at our breaking point, yet she seemed to anticipate that I would put in some effort to salvage our marriage. When I failed to do that, her dislike for me only intensified. I know this is true because even during the divorce, she once called me to ask if I was really going to go through with it and end everything. And I had agreed. We divided everything we owned fairly, ensuring there was no resentment, but our relationship was over. We didn't get along at all, and the feeling was mutual. However, we had to put our differences aside and work together for our son, who was having a tough time coping with our divorce. He never wanted us to get divorced initially, but after it happened, he decided to side with his mother instead of me. That really hurt, especially since we had always been so close growing up. I can't understand how things turned out this way. During the divorce proceedings, we were living apart, and my son was staying with his mom while I was at a friend's place for the first few months. It seems that during that time, she managed to persuade him that I was at fault in some way. I really wish she hadn't involved our son in this. It feels like she needed to retaliate in some way, and if the divorce wasn't going to affect me, she knew this would definitely hit hard. She was right. My son pulling away from me was the worst thing that could happen, and she made sure it did. 3 months ago, she married her coworker. I'm familiar with him. He's been to our place a few times during the work parties my ex-wife used to host. Everyone was caught off guard, and I was utterly unprepared for their wedding. I had no idea how long they had been involved or if she had been unfaithful, but honestly, at that moment, it just didn't matter to me anymore. I chose not to bring it up with her. What really got to me was when my son began sharing posts about his new stepdad. They attended football games together, spent time together, and even at his birthday party, where I wasn't invited, he shared a picture with my ex-wife and his stepdad, captioning it, "Mom and Dad," with a heart, which shattered me. I organized a birthday party for him later, but he didn't appear very enthusiastic. He and his friends ended up just chilling in his room with the cake while I remained in the living room, pondering what had gone awry. Later that night, after his friends had departed, he mentioned that he wanted to discuss something very important with me. My son shared that he had given this a lot of thought and he ultimately decided he wanted me to sign over my parental rights so that his stepdad could adopt him. He mentioned that he felt no connection with me anymore and preferred his new family, so he didn't want me around any longer. I was at a loss for words, and my initial reaction was to dispute his point, but I soon understood that engaging in an argument would be futile. If he chose to be with his stepdad, there was no way I could change that by arguing with him. With a heavy heart, I expressed that I would do anything to ensure his happiness, and if this was his choice, then I would accept it. He expressed his gratitude and departed the following day. The days that followed were incredibly challenging for me. I found myself unable to take any action and ended up skipping work for several days since nothing felt meaningful. The little guy I was putting in all that effort for, hoping to provide him with a good life, didn't want that life at all. Definitely not from my end. I felt completely crushed, spending my days in bed, just staring at the ceiling and fighting back tears. I truly had no clue how to resolve this or if it was even possible to fix. I realized this was orchestrated by my ex-wife, and she must be feeling quite satisfied that she had finally destroyed my relationship with my son for good. I despised her new husband intensely. It wasn't just that he was married to the woman I once loved, it was the fact that he was taking my boy away from me. However, at this point, I was powerless to change the situation. Engaging in conflict with my son would only deteriorate our bond, so all I could do was accept the situation and wish for his return. Incredibly, my son returned just yesterday. However, it wasn't for the reasons I had anticipated. I think he might finally understand that I'm his dad. Maybe his mother has influenced him into thinking that his stepdad is a better fit for the family, but that's simply not the case. I thought he would understand the depth of my love for him and that it would bring him back, but that wasn't the case at all. I was excited when he came over yesterday, thinking he had finally come around. He had, but he still seemed really upset. When I asked him what was going on, he told me that he didn't want me to sign away my rights anymore because his stepdad had told him that he couldn't afford to pay for his college tuition. So there he stood, as there was no alternative available. His mother couldn't cover the expenses on her own, so he had to adhere to the custody agreement if he wanted to attend the college he desired. He appeared genuinely distressed by the situation, and that was really painful to witness. I didn't mistreat him. If anything, he was the one who treated me poorly. I was completely baffled by the intense dislike he seemed to have for me. I couldn't understand why my son harbored such intense hatred towards me. It infuriated me that he seemed to despise me without any justification, all because of his mother's influence. She did an excellent job teaching him, I have to admit. I lost my cool when he said that, because I just couldn't endure this situation any longer, where I pour everything into my son, and all I get in return is silence. I mentioned that he wasn't obligated to stick around if he didn't want to, and there were alternative options for funding college. He could consider getting a job or taking out a student loan if that suited him better. If he believes I'm the worst father, then he should definitely consider being adopted by his stepdad, because I don't want him to endure any more pain. Clearly, I was being quite sarcastic when I mentioned this, and he definitely caught on. He seemed quite embarrassed as I was expressing all of this and didn't say anything, so I kept going with my rant. I couldn't control it. It just flowed out naturally. The years of bottled-up frustration from being unjustly hated by my own son were finally taking their toll on me. The dam had burst, and there was no stopping it now. I explained that I hadn't chosen to get divorced. It was his mother who pushed for it from the start. The reason she despised me was that I hadn't put up a fight for our marriage. I can't say what stories she told him during his time with her, but I want him to understand that the divorce wasn't solely my doing. He needs to let go of all the wrong ideas he has about my relationship with his mother. At just 17, he had no clue about my life or the experiences I had gone through. If he was basing his opinions on the nonsense my ex-wife had been feeding him, he was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't his adversary, and I never even desired a divorce initially. But if that was her wish, then I had no intention of staying around either. I understood that he was struggling with the divorce, but I made every effort to maintain a sense of normalcy for him. Even though I was living apart, I would still drop by during mealtimes, but he would just ignore me, all because his mother had convinced him that I was the cause of the divorce. I expressed my regret about allowing him to stay with his mother during the divorce initially, and my trust that she wouldn't fill his head with negative thoughts about me. I eventually hit a wall after that, and my son was left completely speechless. He remained silent, and I could tell that my words had struck a chord. His expression was a mix of shock and regret. He barely spoke after that, just muttered an apology, and then headed back to his mom's place. It's been a day, and I haven't talked to him since that incident, and I feel really terrible about what went down. I regret not managing my emotions better. I feel terrible for raising my voice at him, especially considering he's only 17 and has been influenced by his mother for the last 2 years. It was incredibly harsh of him to say that the sole reason for his return was so I would cover his college tuition. That was simply unacceptable, in my view. So I got upset with my son after he expressed that he didn't want me to sign my rights over. Update 1. Hi there. I want to express my gratitude for all the love and supportive messages. It's truly uplifting to see how many single dads connect with my story. Keep your heads up, everyone. I've noticed many of you have been curious if I ever suspected my ex-wife of infidelity. To be honest, I really hadn't. Even during the divorce process, I never had any reason to suspect that she was unfaithful. Perhaps there were indications, but I just never noticed them. Honestly, it just doesn't matter to me anymore. I don't believe it matters if she was unfaithful or not. She's already shown herself to be a terrible person by attempting to use our son against me. I don't require any further evidence of her being a worthless individual. I did try to get my son to stay with me during the initial months of the divorce while I was living at my friend's place. I genuinely wanted to go, but my son was adamant that he preferred the comfort of home. Since he was in school, I didn't want to add any more stress for him or my friend than I already had. I made attempts to visit him occasionally, but the atmosphere was so toxic due to my ex-wife that I couldn't endure it for long. Eventually, he began to resent me as well. That's the real story behind it all. I really can't figure out what else I could have done to prevent this situation. I tried hard to shield my son from the turmoil of the divorce, but my ex-wife was determined to involve him and turned him against me. By the time I understood her intentions, it was already too late for me to make amends, and my son had slipped away beyond my reach. It's been several days since I last communicated with my son. We've exchanged texts, but we haven't had a call or a visit yet. I still haven't heard from my ex-wife, so I'm guessing he hasn't mentioned anything about me yelling at him. Typically, he would have immediately voiced his grievances and ensured that my ex-wife raised a significant fuss about it. However, since he's not doing that and attempting to portray me as a bad father, I suppose it indicates that he's finally starting to change his perspective. I'm trying to stay grounded for now, as I want to avoid disappointment. I really hope he reaches out or comes by soon so we can talk about our relationship in detail and work on resolving our issues together. Update 2. My son finally came to see me today, and it was quite the encounter, to put it mildly. I can't claim that our relationship is perfectly resolved now because, clearly, that's not how things operate. Repairing something that's been damaged for an extended period requires patience and effort, but today marked a beginning, and I feel good about that. At first, he appeared quite awkward and uneasy, but he did express his apologies for his behavior. He confessed that during the time of my divorce from his mother, she made sure to communicate to him that I was the one who had destroyed their marriage and that I wasn't even attempting to save it, and he took her words to heart. At just 15, he lacked the understanding to see things clearly. In his search for someone to hold accountable, I became the easiest target for all the problems he faced. Things only worsened after his mother chose to remarry. My son revealed that it was entirely his mother's suggestion for him to share posts with his stepdad, creating the illusion of a close family, even though they weren't really that connected. He acted out solely to retaliate against me for supposedly breaking the family apart, not realizing it was actually his mother who initiated the divorce. It was his mother's idea to have me sign away my parental rights so that his stepdad could adopt him legally. However, She hadn't even talked to him about it and just dropped the news on him out of nowhere. His stepdad was clearly surprised and mentioned that although he enjoyed spending time together, he wasn't ready to adopt him. He felt they needed more time to build a connection before making such a decision. He also stated that he wasn't interested in covering my son's college tuition, which he would ultimately be responsible for if he went through with the adoption. He had the means, but he simply wasn't interested. My son had been visibly affected by everything that had happened, which explained his upset demeanor the other day. However, he mentioned that my outburst was actually crucial for him, as it helped him come to some important realizations he needed to confront. I felt a sense of relief as we finally addressed the issue, and he began to understand how his mother had deceived and manipulated him. It was an amazing day, and we finally managed to reconnect a bit. I'm aware that returning to normal will be a lengthy process, but this is a positive beginning. I express that regardless of everything that has transpired before, I'm open to forgiving him for all of it in order to begin anew. He assured me that he would talk to his mother about everything she had been saying to him over the years, and he even proposed that we seek therapy together to improve our relationship in a healthier and more effective manner. I'm glad this is finally coming to fruition, and even more excited that my ex-wife will finally receive what she deserves. She is an absolutely terrible person and has no right to be a mother whatsoever. I understand this may come off as blunt, but I stand by my words. If she's willing to manipulate her son to make me feel guilty, it's evident she's not a suitable mother. I'm seriously considering filing for full custody soon. Naturally, I need to talk to him about it first. Who knows, he might still want to be with her despite everything. I wouldn't want to stand in his way if that's his choice, even though it would be quite disappointing. I'm going to have a conversation with him to understand his intentions, and after that, I'll consult my lawyer. I really hope he realizes just how repulsive and self-centered his mother is and chooses to be with me instead. I genuinely mean this when I say I hope she faces the consequences of her actions. For years, she has been manipulating and gaslighting our son solely to make me feel guilty. It's hard to fathom the level of coldness required for someone to even consider such an act, much less follow through with it. She's completely unhinged and truly unworthy of having a son like him. I honestly can't comprehend how I spent so many years with her, watching her transform from a loving, supportive partner into a self-absorbed and narcissistic individual seemingly overnight, all because I lost my job. At least now my son and I have a clear understanding of her true nature, and she will ultimately face the consequences of her actions. My son just texted me saying that he's coming over and needs me to pick him up from his mother's place. He mentioned that he's got a lot of things with him, so he needs a ride home instead of taking the bus like he normally does. I can't believe what's happening right now. It seems like he's made the choice to move in with me. This is quite unexpected, but here I am, standing in front of my wife's house, waiting for him to come out. My son asked me to hold on for a few minutes, and I can hear the commotion inside the house. It's hard to tell who's arguing or what the argument is about. I really want to go in and bring my son home, but I'm hesitant because I know my ex-wife will do everything possible to get me in trouble. I'm currently out here waiting for my son. Update 3. Alright, I'm finally back home after a really long evening, and I'm exhausted, but I feel the need to share this to make sense of everything that has happened so far. As I mentioned, I was waiting outside my ex-wife's house earlier since my son had texted me to come and get him. A few minutes after my update, he finally emerged, and even then, I could hear the sound of yelling coming from inside the house. My son stormed towards the car with his bags, his expression filled with anger, and I quickly spotted my ex-wife running after him. Her expression was furious, and the moment she saw me in my car, she marched over and began shouting at me, her face pressed against the window. It was quite frightening, but I warned her that if she didn't back off, I'd have to call the police. She did take a few steps back, but she didn't leave. As I assisted my son in loading his belongings into the car, she kept yelling at me, convinced that I was the reason our son had turned against her. She hurled insults my way, but I remained unfazed. I knew the truth, and so did my son, and that was what truly mattered. She kept yelling at me as we drove off, and out of nowhere, just a few yards from her house, she hurled a rock at the car, shattering one of my taillights. I continued driving for a bit before calling the police right away to report her. My son and I were both taken aback by her actions, and I couldn't fathom how she could behave so erratically simply because the truth had come to light. I filed charges against her and just returned home a few hours ago. My son experienced a complete mental breakdown, and I can tell he's struggling with it deeply. I'm planning to take him to a therapist first thing in the morning. I've decided to file for full custody tomorrow and also seek a restraining order because what occurred today was completely unacceptable. I'm really wishing that her current husband comes to see what a crazy situation he's in and makes a run for it while he still can. I really want to secure full custody of my son and get the restraining order against my ex-wife finalized as soon as possible.